You're ready to start.
Hey, thank you, Drago. So, hello everybody. I'm Thomas Kurth. I welcome you to the CloudEight Virtual Summit session, which is during lunchtime here in Europe. So, we will talk about methods to deploy applications with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. First of all, I would like to thank the sponsors, Script Runner, IT Point, and 365 Microsoft Blog for the support for this event. As I said before, my name is Thomas Kurth. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm certified with most of the certificates in the area of Microsoft 365. I'm also a Microsoft trainer. During my free time, I play hockey, and normally I work at Base Vision for various customers regarding all the topics around Microsoft Endpoint Manager, Azure AD, and the whole threat protection suite. I blog on VP Ninjas, so if you have any questions, you will also find my contact details there, and also various interesting blogs. Today we are talking about all the things in the Microsoft Endpoint Manager suite, which is used to deploy applications. We will learn more about the various application types which are available. The main key takeaways today are that you know the difference between Configuration Manager and the Intune apps, and also get some ideas how you can improve your application strategy in your environment. So let's start. First of all, there are plenty of different application types available. Just in Intune, we have at least 6 different types of application. And also in Config Manager, there we have just 2 main types. We have applications and packages. But within applications, we have many different subtypes which can be used. Today, we are focusing on Config Manager side on the applications, and on Intune, we will take care about Windows apps, Windows line of business apps, and the Microsoft Store apps. We will not have a focus on the Office and Edge deployment. First, we start with the Store apps. The Microsoft Store or Windows Store for Business is something which is around since the beginning of, I think, Windows 8 to 8.1. At the beginning, it shouldn't be the goal that all applications will be there, but everybody has realized that this will never be the case. But what I see that more and more vendors are starting to publish solutions into the store. And the store has some big benefits, like all applications are updating automatically, and also the apps are most often installed in something like a sandbox. So it's also more secure to use such application instead of a normal MSC-based or exe-based installation. Within a store app, we have 3 different deployment types which are available. The first one is the offline method. That's when we get an AppX file from a developer, or we can also download the AppX file from the Store for Business for some applications. We can then create a line of business app, or in Configuration Manager, we can create an application which is based on AppX. The benefit here is we can deploy to these applications to all devices without the requirement to have an Azure AD join or to have a Microsoft account logged on the device. The content is also directly retrieved from the deployment system, so it's also possible to use that when you have limited internet connectivity, for example. The second point is the online volume license base. That's the case which I normally use. That's the store for business integration into Intune or Config Manager, where the application is enabled on the device and requires an Azure AD user because the license is deducted based on the Azure AD account. So a sign-in on the machine is required. The cool thing here is with the online deployment type, when it's store for business integrated, the user or we can forcefully deploy an application to devices. The content is retrieved directly from the store, so delivery optimization and all these things can be used for the download. Then there is a second type of online installation, that's a deep link, where we just deploy the link via Configuration Manager or Intune. The problem here is it opens just the store app and the user has to click on install. So we cannot do a forceful installation of an application. Also in this case, an Azure AD account or a Microsoft account is required. As I said before, I normally use the online based version with an integration into Intune. I can show you that. I don't know if you have ever seen the store for business. Just demonstrate that here. That's the store for business. I'm logged on with my Kurth account, and I can browse here for applications. I can, for example, say, okay, I would like to have here the Remind Me for Windows. I don't know what this application is doing. Can click on Get the app because it's free. Now it's purchased. I can go also to manage. I could assign it here, but that's not required because I have an integration into Config Manager. That's here in the settings on the distribute panel. We can see I have a connectivity to Intune and also one to my Config Manager environment, which in general forces a synchronization in the background. We see that here. That's my Config Manager environment. Here in the software library, I have here license information for store apps. And here, after a short time, the application will pop up and I can then directly create an application which I can deploy like any other application through my Config Manager installation. The same is possible on Intune. If I have added the application in the store for business, it pops up in the Intune application library and I can directly assign it to my users. So when do I use store for business? My most used use case is here, the Microsoft Windows language packs. As you have seen in the last years, the language packs have changed. From the lib package, we can now just use the store package. The big benefit here is that it's automatically updating during an in-place upgrade of the operating system. So I have never to update this application because the newest content is always used directly from the store for business. And that's really cool because I can have hundreds of languages deployed here to my end users, and the end users can just install it, and I have nothing to do with the process or keeping the content in my packages up to date. So that's the store for business. I think you have now seen how the integration could look like. I really suggest to do this integration because you always find application which you could use from this source. What next? Now we focus on the other application types, so the main applications which we would like to deploy. Here we have first on Intune side, we have the Windows line of business apps. The Windows line of business apps is an app model which is based on the MDM channel. The MDM channel is somehow limited because it's based on the Windows technology. the Windows team has to provide all the options which the Intune team then can use, or any other MDM vendor. And it's really a simple method to deploy MSE packages. You cannot deploy an exe file, you cannot deploy an MSP patch, you cannot add a MST file, for example. You really can only deploy a single MSE file. And that's, in most cases, too limited. On Intune, we have then other thing which was added 2 years ago. That's the Intune Management extension, somehow also called the Win32-bit app extension, or sidecar was it also called at the beginning. That's merely, it's not an agent, but it's a separate infrastructure which is running beside the MDM channel. So it has his own connectivity to Intune, it has his own protocols, and it has also his own log files. The cool thing is here, the Intune team doesn't have any dependencies to the Windows team, so they can directly add the features which they require. And because of that, that's really a great application type. We also see it has most things in common to Config Manager. So the same people which deployed the application model on Config Manager have also worked on the Intune Management extension. The Intune Management extension is using the delivery optimization to optimize download traffic. There are really cool flowcharts, as you can see on the right side. You can find them with the link which is in the presentation. You have there plenty of these flowcharts which highlight how you can create an application, how the application is deployed. So what is my preferred application type on Intune? Here, I definitely can say it's the Win32-bit app. The main thing is, for me, it's the functionality. I have much more functionality available. We will see them a little bit later, especially dependencies, supersedence, which I can use. But for me as an engineer, the most important thing is troubleshooting. I have really cool log files where I understand what is going on. With the MSE MDM channel, I just have the syncml messages in the Windows event log. And if some of you have tried to read such a message, you have hundreds of messages. That's the first problem. And then to get the right information and understand it is not that easy. Because of that, Win32-bit applications are for me the normal way to deploy today applications. Also, if I have an MSE file, I will wrap it into a Win32-bit application. What is important to know, because it is a separate deployment channel and is not using the MDM channel, we see, for example, here in the application section in the settings, we don't see all the applications always. That's because of they are a separate assignment. The Intune Management extension will get the policy not within the same with the same OMA channel. So now, should I use Intune or Config Manager to deploy applications? That's a question which I always get from my customers, and it's not so easy to answer. It depends a little bit also on the existing environment. For example, if you have an existing environment with Config Manager, you have all applications packaged, then probably it's better to have a co-managed installation and deployed applications over Config Manager, because with CMG, we are also able to deploy applications everywhere. we have the software center which can be used. That is has a big impact, because migrating all applications from Config Manager to Intune or from any other system to Intune could be or could require big efforts. The only thing is, if you have a cloud-only goal, for example, if you say, okay, we would like to remove all on-prem infrastructure in the future, then it makes sense to migrate really all applications to Intune. But now we will go through all the features which we have in the two environments and compare them. First of all, I said before, logging. As you can see here, we have on Config Manager side, we have plenty of log files. If you have ever seen in Config Manager, we have around 20 to 30 different log files, which are detailed logging all actions the client is doing. On Intune, the sidecar is just responsible for application deployment, executing PowerShell scripts, and therefore we have a fewer log files, but still all the relevant information are in them. You also see, if you open such a log file, you see the logging is done the same way. So we have nearly the same information inside of the log files. Therefore, here I don't see a big difference if we speak about deploying applications. Troubleshooting and testing is always an important part of us as engineers. Here we have two differences. On Config Manager, I have the control panel item where I can start a user machine policy update. I can start an application evaluation cycle. I can also do that, for example, from the software center. I can also start it via command line. All really simple, easy to use. On MDM, here it's a little bit different because I have to restart services, for example. That's one thing, but restarting a service requires admin rights. So a normal user cannot just say, oh, try again or something like that. It always has to do that. If I start just an MDM sync, there is a big MDM overhead. If we say we would like to just start an application installation immediately, I'm not sure if we would like also to synchronize all policies. So it could be that we have to wait 5 minutes until the client is really triggering the management extension to also start their work. So that can be for an engineer, wait 5 minutes, 10 times a day. It's already 1 hour where he's just waiting. But there is something which, thanks to Oliver Kieselbach, is a possibility to start just the Intune management extension without the requirement to restart the whole service. It's a command line which can be started from the run command, Intune management extension, / sync app. So also with that, we as engineers are able to start a sync process really easily, but we always have to type it. So there is no help for that. So it's something which is now burned into my brain, this command here, because I use it quite often. Yeah, I hope that Microsoft will improve that in the future, but currently that are the options which we have. So you see, Config Manager side, really simple. We have it UI based, we have command line. On Intune side, yeah, it's working. Then the next thing is reboot handling. Always when deploying applications, we have one thing which is always a pain is if an application requires a reboot. Is there a perfect solution? I think no, definitely not. A reboot is always an interruption of the work from an end user. Can we do it better or worse? Yes, definitely. At the end, we have in both systems nearly the same options. we can define per exit code, for example, what reboot type needs to be done. One important thing is here the soft reboot and the hard reboot. There is a difference between of them. The soft reboot is creating a notification for the end user. On Intune side, it's a toast notification. If the users are like me and just disabling all notifications in the Windows control panel, then they will never see that. On Config Manager side, there is a pop-up in the middle of the screen with a nice information for the end user. So here, Config Manager has a little bit a better user interaction or user experience. That's the soft reboot. The hard reboot is really, it's rebooting. You have nearly no delay available as end user, just the system will reboot. The hard reboot is in one case helpful. It's, for example, if you have to update the BIOS and the BIOS is really requiring a reboot. Otherwise, for example, the hardware is in an unsupported status or something like that. So important to know, soft reboot, hard reboot, there is a difference between the two. On the right side, we see there are possibilities on Intune side to define some periods, how long a user has time to reboot a device. Here it's important that as a user on Intune normally has 2 to 4 hours time to reboot. That's something which is important. I think on Config Manager side, one thing which is much more interesting is the availability time. I normally work with the availability time of a deployment because then I can just make an application available to my end users, and the end user can then define when they would like to install the application. And if they click on install and 1 or 2 minutes later they get an information, hey, you need to reboot, then they know, okay, it's because I clicked before on install. Then that's not a problem. And the user was also started it. Then it's much less, then it's much a better experience than if you just install it in background and then at some point of time you get a pop-up and say, hey, you need to reboot. So use the availability time on Config Manager side, and otherwise try to have a grace period for the reboot between 2 to 4 hours. It shouldn't be longer. We also see applications which have problems if you don't reboot. For example, Office updates. If you don't boot after you have installed Office updates, it could lead to problems. So most often when I see, oh, Outlook is crashing, is hanging, Word has problems, close the applications, and then I see, oh, click to run is updating my Office. Okay. So Reboot Handling, both tools have most of the options available. Regarding the user notifications, I clearly say that the Config Manager side has an advantage because it's not just a toast notification. Then maintenance windows, that's something which is not available on Intune. That's something which is just a Config Manager feature. This maintenance window is really helpful if you have machine control computers or if you have high available production devices. Then you can define maintenance windows that's independently of the application assignment, but then an application assignment also when it's required, it's just installed during this time frame. So that's something which is really cool, and I often use in companies for specific high-risk devices. But for end users, I try to never use that. For normal end users, probably you have seen that also, is Windows is trying to elaborate your work hours. And for example, Windows Update for Business is trying then to install update outside of your normal work schedule. So there is already some intelligence built in if you just deploy a normal application on Intune or mostly with Windows Update for Business. Then if we create an application, we know it, sometimes there is a prerequisite which needs to be fulfilled to be able to install a software. Here on the left side, we see on config manager side, we can define device-based or user-based requirements. On device side, we can define nearly everything. We can also create own conditions based on VMI queries or registry entries, for example, or files, and then compare that. On Intune side, we have just a few requirements predefined, like disk space, memory requirement, but then we have something which is again really flexible. That's the possibility to add a PowerShell script, for example, to do the requirement tests. With that, I'm again able to check registry keys. I can try to, for example, just deploy a software if the operating system has the language German, or if the IP subnet has a specific or if it's in a specific subnet, things like that can be done with the script. So here I'm really flexible. I think it's already a little bit more flexible in Intune than in Config Manager, because in Config Manager I cannot add just a script for this. So requirements a little bit better on Intune side. Then we have Supersedence. Supersedence is are used when you have a new version of an application and would like to supersede the old one. On Config Manager, we have there plenty of options. We have the possibility to uninstall the old one if it's, for example, a major version. We can also just say, okay, it's just installing as an update to the existing binaries, so the old one doesn't need to be uninstalled. Or the setup, for example, is doing the uninstall of the old version automatically. On Intune side, we got this feature too, that was released this spring. So also here we have the possibility to do to define supersedence now. There are also possibilities available based on scripts and detection scripts for updating apps, but you no longer have to use them. So I see that or saw that in the last few months a few times when customer told me, hey, I found there a solution to supersede application. Here, I really have to say you, that's now a built-in Intune feature to define the supersedence directly in Intune. Dependencies can be used if I have an application which is dependent on another one. For example, if I have a specific bigger business application which is dependent on a Java installation, then I can create a dependency. It's never recommended to build a big package where multiple applications are in one package. So it's really recommended to build separate per application, one application, and then to build dependencies. They are evaluated during the installation, and that's helpful if it's already pre-installed. Then it's doing nothing, or otherwise it's installing the dependency. We can also say do not automatically install the application. Then the main application will just go to a failed installation. So now the big question is, should we use Intune or Config Manager to deploy applications today? if I think about it, if we have already a config manager installation, if we have co-management, if we have existing application, then I would go more into the direction of config manager. If we have a direct or a goal to have a cloud-only environment, then it's more Intune. What is important is that you have a simple software catalog on Intune side, that you don't have the possibilities like you have in the software center. And on the config manager, we have just more possibilities in nearly all of the features. But for most of the customers, I definitely think today you can start using Intune as an application deployment system. So that was the application model. But if we have chosen which applications we would like to create, the next thing is how do we assign applications to our users? And there are various strategies. All can be good, all can be bad. I would like to highlight the most important thing. First of all, we can target applications to users or devices. On config manager side, it's possible to deploy, for example, to users, but just display the software when the user is on his primary device. So we have a possibility to filter applications which are assigned to a user also based on the device. That's something which is not possible on Intune side. Because of that, I most often assign global applications more to the devices instead of the users, and just department-based applications, for example, to users. We can define how is the enforcement handled between required and available. Required means the software will be just installed as soon the policy is on a device. I can define some basic schedules on Intune side, but on config manager side, I can really define the time based on time zone and things like that. But that's really an aggressive deployment variant. So I normally use really available. The user gets a pop-up, hey, you have a new software which you can install, and then the end user can install it when he has time for it. That's the first thing. Then also, how do I group applications together? For example, on config manager, I can build collections to deploy software. In Azure AD, I have to create AD groups to be able to deploy software in Intune to specific groups. And here I think it's important that you from the beginning have two different types. One is that you have specific collections for specific applications, so a one-to-one assignment, but that you also have software profiles where you have multiple applications assigned to one collection. That's especially for department applications or country applications, that you don't have to create too many collections or AD groups, because all collections or AD groups also need to be maintained. Also, again, something which we have in the enforcement, if you have available, there is the difference between of the software center and the company portal. You see here the software center from config manager. Here we have the possibility to add, for example, also some additional sections where we are able to add a browser window into the software center, so we can expand the software center dynamically, where the company portal, just have to show you that, is a little bit limited regarding customization, but at the end it brings you nearly the same possibilities. I have my applications which I can browse. I can select one, I can install it, I can also repair a specific application if I have it. So I have the install button, I can uninstall if it was available. So I have all the options available. What is not possible, for example, an approval workflow. With Config Manager, I have an approval workflow, and that's also something which I would like to show you a little bit later. So my main goal is to use self-service for most of the applications. Depending on the company, it's the company portal or the software center. And for all applications which need to have an approval, it's most often based on, for example, a CMDB, a service management, service portal, which is then a software catalog for the end user where the user can order a software, and the service portal is then adding the user to a specific AD, Azure AD group, or directly to a config manager collection. So that we have there a big automation. What I never like is if the user has to call the help desk to get the specific software installed. I would like to show you here two things. First of all, what I see quite often is if we have here a collection in Config Manager. For example, we have here a user collection. I have one option to add here members based on a dynamic rule, member rules. I can add here a query, and on the query I can say, okay, I would like to have all which are in a specific group. That's a user resource, and then I have the user group name. And then I can filter all groups where a user can be. So I can say, okay, if the user is in the purchasing department, then he should come into this collection. The problem of queries is a query is executed based on a schedule. It takes some time, normally a half second, a second per collection. If you have plenty of collection, that's requiring a lot of time. Then again, if you have an AD group, you add a software or you add a user to an AD group, which is added like I showed now to the collection. Then first, Config Manager needs to do an AD discovery, that it gets the new collection membership. That's something which can take between a few minutes to a half an hour or hour, depending on the schedule you have defined. Then the collection needs to be refreshed, and then the client needs to get the new policies. So you see, such a deployment, if a user requests a software with this background infrastructure, it can take up to a half an hour until the end user gets the software. Much better is, instead of adding a query, just adding the group itself. Here we have a little bit the better experience. Purchase. Oh, was it? So you see, I'm able to directly add the group itself to the collection. So I can directly select here the group, say add. If I go now to the membership rules, you see it's a direct rule that this will not require a collection update because the group is now a member. I don't have to change anything. The only thing which needs now to be done if a user is added to this group, the user needs to sign off and sign on again on his device, because then he has in his token this new group and will get also the application assignment. Already much faster, but we can do it again, a little bit faster than that. That's based on application approvals. We can define on when we deploy an application. For example, I will now take the Citrix workspace, for example, here, create here a deployment, deploy. I will deploy that now to all users. We should never do that, but I will now choose that. Next, it's already assigned to my distribution groups. I say, okay, it should be available. And I say, okay, an administrator must approve a request for this application. Okay, I'll now do that. Next, 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 next. We can also assign it to all devices. It's independent of that. We can also do it to devices. Just do that because that's again a little bit faster. Okay, so you saw I just created this deployment, and I have now a PowerShell script which is able to create an approval for this application. So in normal case, a user can now go to the software center and click on request application. Then it would create here an approval request. And then an administrator can say, approve this. And then directly the installation will start. But we can now change that a little bit. That's a feature which is available now 1 year or 2 years. That's something in the client settings. We can define that an application which is deployed as available and requires approval is hidden. That's here, hide unapproved applications in Software Center. So with this setting in place, if I go to a client, you see that here, just sign on. Just close that here, go to the Software Center. So you see here, I don't see Citrix. I see it also not here in the application section, just because it's hidden. If I go back to Config Manager, show my script, I have here the machine name. I have here to add the application name. We then got the application ID and the device ID with these commands, and then create an application request which is already approved. If I do that, you can see it takes, it should work already, yeah. If I go now to my device, if we wait here a few seconds, you already see it's here. And if I go to the installation status, it's already installing. You saw we can, with that, dramatically reduce the assignment time of new applications. And that's something which I think is really cool, because until now, all our service management tools have added the user to an AD group or things like that. I think it's much simpler to just use these few commands, and then you are able to install applications within seconds. Also, an uninstall just works if I say, okay, I deny now a specific request, then automatically the uninstallation will start. So you see here, that's something which is really cool and can be used. So what else if we talk about application assignment? One is autopilot. If we have autopilot, I really recommend that you just use one single MSC or Win32 applications or Config Manager applications. Don't mix them, because as soon you mix them, you have the problem that multiple agents, I call it now agents, are installing applications in parallel. and that can always lead to problems. So only use a single method. If you have Intune, use the Win32-bit applications. Also, if you just have an MSE file, wrap it into this application type. If you use the Intune management extension, which you probably will with Win32-bit app, that's also an application, and that one will be deployed always over MDM first. The Intune management extension, sometimes if you have to troubleshoot during autopilot, you don't find the correct log entries. Here it's important you can extend the log file size. Oliver Kieselbach again wrote a really cool blog about that, how you can do that. I really recommend to do that because only then you have really the full log file available after an autopilot enrollment. Then content distribution, always think about all the optimization technologies which are available. Just to mention a few, delivery optimization, LEDPAD, branch cache, use them to reduce the download traffic you have in your environment. Also VPN, if you have VPN to use with always on functionality, never use forced tunneling for the deployment systems. That can create huge problems, especially if most of your devices are remote devices. I hope I could give you a few inputs about application types, which are available in the various solutions. And you know now the difference, and also got probably some ideas how you can improve your infrastructure. For example, as you saw before, for example, switching from config manager to Intune Win32-bit applications, or also in the assignment strategies, use the app approval feature in config manager to speed up your deployments and to get a better user experience. So thank you to join this session. If you have any questions, I will be a few minutes here in the meeting, so just unmute and ask the question.